This is a sort of different episode for Ando's Thinky Time podcast. This week, folks, I'm not interviewing anybody. I am recounting a story from my life. And there's probably two things that I probably ought to come out and say in the beginning. This story contains some illicit activity, I suppose some might say. Others might say it is spiritual soul-searching and scientific discovery of the universe. I believe that it was legal to do when I did it. And I'm not sure that it is anymore. But when I did it, I believe it was completely legal and in a different state, by golly. If it turns out not to be legal, I guess what I want to say is, really, it's the character of Ando that lived this parable. And maybe, the details are true, or maybe they're not true. I don't know. It could be either way. Maybe that protects me on some level. I don't think it really does. Or I don't really think I need protection. The second thing that you need to know about this podcast is I am recording it from a bubble bath. I decided to be impulsive and pour myself a nice steamy bath before I recounted this story about a psychedelic journey that I had long, long ago. Thank you for listening to this episode. Please check me out at andyepler.com and at patreon.com/Ando the artist. Thank you for listening. And now I send you to Ando in his bath. Once upon a time, around about 2008, somewhere in there, late 2008 probably, I was losing faith in my religion because I had started looking up stuff on the internet, in a new way. It sounds like one of those stories about people coming out of Scientology that finally Google Scientology for the first time. But that's kind of what it was like for me. And I finally learned about evolution, and I was finally presented with a real teaching of that made sense, instead of just like, some scientists think we came from monkeys, but we didn't. That's all you need to know about evolution. That's all I was really taught about it. And so anyway, around about 2008, I was kind of coming out of all that stuff and starting to kind of reassess reality in a new way. And I write a lot about this experience in general in my book, New Reason, New Way, How My Skepticism Changed My Art. Obviously, you can tell from the title, the book is mostly kind of an autobiographical story, but it's also got a lot of art philosophy built into it, how I think art works. And I talk a lot about leaving my religion in a lot more detail and blah blah in that book. If you'd like to read that, I hope you do. But I was coming into a new place, and I heard about. I was also a little wary of drugs and illegal stuff. So I had never tried something like LSD or, mushrooms or anything like that before. But I heard that there was a legal substance that I could purchase and smoke it and have a mystical experience, which was very interesting to me because I'd never really had a mystical experience outside of a church atmosphere. And so, obviously, if I could get into the mystical realm that way, that would break a lot of the other things that I believed. So it became an important experiment for me to run. And I guess, I guess I should say things like, I'm not advocating drug use, and if you're a kid and you're listening to this, fuck off. You shouldn't be listening to this. And if you're a stupid adult that's listening to this, you should fuck off too, because for the same reasons as the kid having to fuck off. But if you're a responsible adult and you're in a place where this is a legal thing, as it was where I was at the time, legal activity, of course, mostly, probably misuse of a legal product, then whatever, be an adult or whatever. I'm not advocating this is for everybody. I think it's probably not for most people. It's a pretty extreme experience that I'm about to talk about. And it's a really important thing to take seriously, in my opinion. Don't go into the mystical fucking place, without washing your hands, so to speak. You know what it's like, dude? This is, maybe I'm already going off topic. Or maybe it's just sitting in a bath and smoking a bowl and talking into a microphone by myself that makes me go off on so many rabbit trails. But I am about to talk about something that's very strange, and it could do with some explaining. I'm very interested in that psychedelic space, and I'm happy to be able to tell a story about this first experience that I had, because I did things wrong and I did things right. And I'll be happy to explain that as we go. But one thing I did right was I got my mind right first. And I was really serious and prayerful, and I said, I prayed something along the lines of, I'm starting to think that you're not there, Jesus, I'm starting to think you're not there, and since you won't come out and show yourself to me in a tangible way that I can know, and I can have some kind of, all the evidence is fucking pointing against you, bro. So, if you want me to work with you, I need something from your end, some proof. It can be metaphysical, whatever. Give me something. And since you haven't done that, I'm going to come looking for you where you live. And that was, because I also believed at the time that I was righteous, because I was still kind of a Christian, and so if I was going to run into the Christian God, he would have to be cool, because I've got my Jesus ticket in hand and everything. So it's pretty safe to venture into that realm, I would think, and I'll be respectful if I run into somebody fancy, But it is like you're going into your own mental space. That's essentially what it is. And when this stuff happens, I don't believe there's a real mystical realm. That's really not. I talk in that kind of language sometimes, but that's not literally what I mean. I believe it's a mode of brain thinking. It's a mode of brain chemistry plus thinking that come together, and you're able to access more of that kind of stuff. I believe that's what's really happening. So I believe it's like you have more access to what your brain can actually do when you get in these kind of states, which is a scary thing and a wonderful thing. And if you're not a little scared, you won't really appreciate the wonder. That's my opinion. In the Old Testament, in the Bible, when somebody would go into the Holy of Holies, it was only like a certain kind of priest, and they were trained and all this stuff, but even they would fuck it up sometimes. And in that story, when the priest goes into the sacred innermost part of the temple where God lived, supposedly, right, in the story, when he would go in there, he'd have to really be clean, physically clean, but also like spiritually, emotionally clean, like a real high-level monk, essentially, like a real fancy spiritual character is the only kind that could go in there. And if you're anything else, you fucking get killed by God. God fucking kills all the guys. So it happened enough times to where the Israelites started tying a rope around the priest's foot with a little bell on it. I believe the bell part's true too, but they at least had a rope on his ankle, and if they felt him, kind of stop moving around in there, they'd start kind of pulling him back out, because he's probably fucking dead. And I think that's kind of like, whatever. I don't know if that shit ever even really happened. Maybe it did, but if it did and if it didn't, it means the same shit. To me, it means you can't go into a high-ranking spiritual place unless you're a high-ranking, high-level kind of character. And I don't think I was, and I still don't think I'm a high-level, mystical, magic being.
or whatever. But like, boy, you're better off if you're going in with that kind of skill set. You know, my first experience I'm about to tell you about defies this story because, you know, I didn't know really what I was getting into at all. I bought it from this dude at the smoke shop. He's like a regular place in Lubbock, Texas. And it's like an incense that you burn, you know. But if you breathe it in, you know, take a hit of it basically, you trip your balls off. The stuff was called Salvia. And I was like, I told him what I was about, told him what I was interested in, and I'm an artist, and so it's safe to ruin my brain if we need to. And, you know, he gave me the strongest kind, you know, whatever. So I took it and went back to my house, and I wish that I could go back in time and just be a fly on the wall. I wouldn't change any of these events, but I wish I could have been a fly on that wall and watched him freak out, because I did several things that I wasn't supposed to do. And here's some advice. You know, I don't know if Salvia is even legal anymore. I don't think it really is. I think the cops got hip to that. But it's a really, really high level experience. And most people that you see, like on YouTube, you'll see people doing it, and they just look, you know, terrified, and, you know, it doesn't look like a good thing. But my experience, I don't know what it looked like on the outside. Here's what fucking happened to me. I took a big hit from my pipe. I was alone in my house, dimly lit at night, in the middle of the night, which, boy, there's several things right there. Boy, that's just not a good idea for a first-timer, you know. Not by yourself, you know, you want a guide or a buddy to kind of level you out if you start freaking out or whatever. You want that. You want to be careful to have your setting positive. You know, like, it was a little dark in there. It could have been a little scary. And that, boy, a little scary is a lot of scary. I think. But I didn't know that shit. And I took my big old hit of this stuff and held it for 30 seconds. And then I let it out. And as I let it out, I felt the strangest thing. Because I'd only really ever smoked a little bit of weed before, and I was mostly an alcoholic back then. But the strangest feeling was in my mind. It tasted like incense, you know, because that's basically what it was. But it felt like it filled my mind with the smell of incense. And it felt like, you know, oh, fuck. Now, you weren't expecting this. Which is like, should be on the goddamn packaging. You know, for any psychedelics they go ahead and legalize in the next few years, they should put, oh, but you're not expecting this. So I, you know, it didn't hit me immediately. It kind of crept in and then hit me like a fucking tidal wave. You know, it felt like the tide was doing something weird in my mind, essentially. And what happened to me was, this first time, I let it out, and I felt this kind of fluttering kind of feeling behind me. And I couldn't see anything when I looked over my shoulder, but I felt like a fan almost. And I found that when I leaned back a little bit, it was very intense. It got way stronger, and a little visuals, like a you know what it felt like? It felt like a riffling card deck. You know, like when you're shuffling some playing cards. You know, it was that noise, that forever. You know, a million cards, a never-ending deck, riffling invisibly behind me, the size of my body. And as I leaned back, I realized I was the card deck, of course, and these different things riffling by were different dimensions or different realities. And I found that if I just leaned back, there was a point at which there was a choice to fall back into that reality, you know? And that was scary because I had never considered that I might have to leave my dimension. And I wasn't sure if I left how I could get back. That was that was a little unsettling, a lot unsettling. And so I reached for my phone, and it was like it was a phone from the wall back then. So we were still poor as fuck. And I think only one of us had a cell phone. I think it was my wife had a phone. And so I used the phone to call her. And I could barely work the machine, you know. But I was fighting to stay in my dimension and lean forward as much as I possibly could and not lean back, because it felt like any time I leaned back, I was starting to slip out of my world. Holy fuck, it was scary at this point. And so I was trying to call my wife to be like, hey, yo, I think I might be leaving our dimension. By the way, I took a drug today that I didn't tell you about, really. And, you know, I figured it would all be over and stuff when you came home, so, you know, no big deal. But turns out, big deal. And, you know, I'm leaving this universe, and it's really important. Are you around? You know? But luckily I couldn't get through to her phone. And I realized how crazy what I was going to say in this voicemail was going to be. If I left her a message, I would just scare her. I don't want to scare her, you know. So I just hung up the phone and went over by the carpet and leaned back. And all of a sudden, I was in a different world. It happened so quickly. It was like my brain had been swept up by one of those passing cards that was riffling behind me. You know, it felt like, oh God, it felt so fast. It felt like I could see him going by at first. But when I got to some kind of a barrier behind me as I leaned back, I just went out with one of those cards. And suddenly, I was in a backyard. Like a green grass. It looked a little bit like my childhood backyard, but it was like a dream, right? It was like it was playing my childhood backyard in a play, you know. And I found that I was a little kid. I must have been 2, you know. My hands were tiny. I looked down and I was a little boy. And I was wearing like some little blue shorts and some white tennis shoes like I grew up with, like in the 80s and 90s and shit. And I think I was even wearing like a little blue polo shirt, you know. And I was just running around like a backyard, and maybe there was like a little dog there that I didn't recognize. And I couldn't look up, you know. I could only look kind of, I don't know, half of the way up. If I'm nodding my head, I could only go about halfway up. I couldn't look up to see any of the adults' faces around me. But there were some, kind of in the background, there were some adults hanging out. And there was one guy that came out into the grass, and he was wearing some white tennis shoes and a red pair of like these coaching shorts. Remember those? They're like too short to be comfortable, you know, for people to be around you kind of thing, you know. And big hairy legs, you know. It read to me like, oh, that's Dad, you know. That's Dad, and he's coming to check on me or whatever, and I'm doing good. I'm hanging out in the fucking sunshine, hanging out in the grass. And he just come over here, and I couldn't hear what he was saying, but it was kind of like, hey, how you doing, or whatever. And I was kind of like, yeah. And then all of a sudden, I was back in my living room, completely sober, like nothing had happened. But something had happened. I went somewhere in my mind. It was like a lucid dream, the most potent dream I ever had, you know. scary and wonderful and beautiful and not what I expected at all. That was the first time. That experience lasted a few minutes, but it felt much longer. You know, it felt like, you know, have I been here an hour? Have I been in this backyard? How long have I had long enough to go, where am I? What is this? You know, I didn't really have my full mind about me, but I had enough to go, oh, I'm not a little boy. What the fuck's happening? You know, where is this? And why can't I look up? Why can't I see faces and stuff? It was so strange, man. And it was enough to make me do it again that same night.
So tune in next time for that story. Thank you very much for listening to Ando's Thinky Time podcast. And just remember that the story I just told you was technically containing no illegal activity, really. I purchased a legal product and did my own thing with it. Did my own thing like every American should. Do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else, right? Isn't that the great American rule? I think so. So tune in next time to hear about the second half of this experience. It's, boy, is it stranger? Yeah, the second one's much stranger. See you next time.